of July. It is Saturday morning for our Chatechesis. So Roisín, welcome as well.
Oh, thank you, Father, for putting up with me.
Very good. And as Roisín said, the moon has landed here in the studio. Our lighting is undergoing something by way of experimentation and a bit of enhancement, I hope, as well as part of it, and our background and so on. And in fact, David Conroy brings that expertise to the studio here, and the ambition is that we'll do a little better. These are sort of temporary props for the time being. They're kind of big lumpy articles of light emitting apparatus. That the plan is that we'll figure out a way of suspending these things from the ceiling and having a permanent setup. And Nuri, of course, has great plans. All our video entrepreneurs say we should set up a little video set by way of, maybe using the room a bit better, having different sets and just swinging the camera around and for different
great
guests
idea,
and so on.
yes.
So there might yet be a couch in the corner there where we can recline and relax and engage in conversation here till we the cows come home.
I'll bring that in right away, Father.
It'll make for a kind of a more attractive set and a backdrop, I feel like.
For and
the
if even more relaxed, rather, Yeah.
It's pretty laid back, I think, as things stand.
Well, mentally relaxed.
True, yes. So the lighting features here are with a view to just enhancing our video presence. It's very much a work in progress.
It's fantastic, though, Father. It really
is.
It does look like a big moon, lads and lassies.
It's about 4 foot in diameter, a big circle, I'd say, and has a cloth in front of it that just dulls the light. Probably like, if you're going for your family portrait or First Communion or graduation photograph, that kind of thing.
All right.
You'd have this elaborate lighting so that it looks like the sun is shining on you, but it's actually not true. Would that it were so easy, and would that the light of God's grace could occupy our lives in the same way.
I think he's doing it anyway, Father.
He is. We only have to be open to it. I suppose we only have to switch on the channel. Maybe that's probably what it is. So now it's nice to have your company today. A little mention for our saints today. Saint Augustine Zaorong and his companions. Optional memorial, so I went with the Mass of the day. But just to give Saint Augustine Zaorong a mention, he was one of the Chinese soldiers who escorted Bishop John Gabriel Taurin du Fres to his execution. And moved by the patience of Bishop John, he asked to be baptized. So the good example of one of the Chinese martyrs. And in due course, St. Augustine, or at least he wasn't saint yet, but Zaorong, he went to the seminary and was ordained a priest. And sometime after, he was later arrested and badly tortured. The infamous really Chinese torture. It doesn't say what they did, but he died in 1815. And with him, St. Augustine Zaorong are celebrated 119 of his companions in martyrdom in China between the years 1648 and 1930, including Bishop du Fres. So it's over 280 years really. So, but a lot of martyrs in China that, and even to this day, the faith is not. It's under duress greatly in China, and Pope Francis is doing his best to kind of arrange negotiations and dialogue with the Chinese government, because you have on the one hand the Chinese Patriotic Church, which is the government-run Catholic Church, and what's known in the West at least as the underground church, which would be those Catholics in China who would see themselves affiliated to Rome rather than the state. And what the state does is appoints its own bishops, and part of the conversation Pope Francis and all these diplomats are trying to do is step by step to have the state confer with Rome with respect to the appointments of bishops. Because if Rome appoints bishops, the Chinese perspective on that is that, look, this is imperialism. We're having authority imposed on us from without, and we're not involved in the consultation. And so that is that's something that the Chinese culture they find difficult to deal with, I suppose, traditionally and historically. And in the past, of course, the likes of Mao Zedong and some of these dictators have had their way and expelled many missionaries, many Irish missionaries, the Columbans, went to China, but were thrown out in the time of Mao Zedong, and there's been this resistance to the state in the underground church ever since, and the patriotic church, and so you have a little bit of conflict going on between the two elements of the church, so it's very, very difficult. So in China, traditionally it's been very difficult to practice one's faith, and at various intervals they have a kind of, not a lockdown, let's say, but a purge, if you like, of even the Protestant and evangelical churches that try to make some inroads into evangelizing China. And yet they do say that Christianity is one of the fastest growing faiths in China, that it's obviously captivating the minds and the hearts of the good Chinese people. As Father Aidan McGrath, our own wonderful priest and Legion priest for many years, he ministered in China, and he found that the good Chinese people were amenable to the faith, and particularly to the Legion of Mary and the structure and the organisation of it. And things were going very well for a time, but sadly, the Chinese government kind of weighed in, and he was imprisoned for 2.5 years and expelled in the end, as Bishop Ned Galvin, the Cork bishop who founded the Maynooth Mission to China. They were all thrown out, and there's books and books written about the terrible persecution of the church and what missionaries and the native Chinese people suffered during those times. And there was untold, this is only 119 martyrs that are remembered today. There are any other number of martyrs even since, and many of them members of the Legion of Mary. Imprisoned and tortured for years and put to death as well. And those stories remain to be told. They need to be told,
Father, because people in China, God bless them, if they want to be Catholic, they are taking a big risk. God bless them.
Open up to real persecution. Who was it? I read an article in the I think it was the Far East, that's the Columban magazine, of a priest who was visiting the shrine of Our Lady of Sheshan in Shanghai. He said, I'd love to go sometime. It's on my bucket list, below the Holy Land and a few other things, but I visited China. It's a vast nation, and any visit, I'd say, wouldn't do it justice, but it'd be lovely to visit the shrine of Our Lady of Sheshan. But this writer in the Far East magazine was saying how he had paid a little pilgrimage to the shrine, and on his way he met two ladies who were wearing miraculous medals, and he got chatting to them, and he said, look, we're on a pilgrimage of thanksgiving to Our Lady. We've just been released from prison because we were arrested for wearing our medals and practicing our faith.
Oh my goodness.
So we've come back to give thanks to Our Lady that we've been set free again. Gee. So where would you be going? That you can't even practice your faith publicly in that way, but that you're under that kind of scrutiny.
It's terrible to think that people, men or women, wherever are doing this, are ignoring that Jesus is there and Jesus set them up. Jesus gave them life, and that they're not turning around and thanking him, and they want to rule the world and rule the faith. It's dreadful.
And it's hard for us to understand what is the mentality that says, why would you do that? What is it that you object about Christianity that makes you want to imprison people or persecute them? So there has to be a diabolic element to that somehow. It's
absolutely
terrible
on the
persecution.
wrong foot, Father, they are. God help them.
So, when it comes to remembering the persecuted church, we hear of Nigeria and terrible attacks going on there at the moment, and so many other parts of the world where the faith is just not being received and not being welcomed, and yet the first thing often that missionaries seek to do is to help the poor. So 119 martyrs in China recognized by the church today, and as I say, from 1648 to 1930. And I wonder if anybody has made a record, is keeping any kind of record since 1930. It's last
happening since
90 years. Official persecution of Christians by the emperors ceased in 1842, but violent anti-religious sentiments persisted, and in the Boxer Rebellion of the year 1900, Christians were particularly attacked and many thousands were killed. And then this is just a little commentary really for today's feast day. But then from the 1940s, once the Japanese had been expelled from China, they tried to take over China during the Second World War in 1939. And there was awful atrocities committed at that time between the Japanese and the Chinese. But then the communists took over and overran the Japanese, and of course the dropping of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki just completely, the Japanese capitulated at that stage. So communism then took over. That's where the interesting story of Father Aidan McGrath and Monsignor Antonio Ribery step in, because he was the papal nuncio to China, appointed in 1948. He had come from West Africa, and he'd witnessed the great work of Edel Quinn in Africa, and as a lay person, animating the local people to faith.
Yes.
So when Archbishop Ribery came to China in 1948, Edel Quinn had died in 1944, a few years, and he came to China and he started asking the question, well, is the Legion of Mary going? Is there anyone who, like Edel Quinn, who can get the Legion going? And so questions were asked, and everybody was kind of, well, the only one we know who's set on it, who's gung-ho, is Father Aidan McGrath. And so he called on Father Aidan McGrath, who was with the Columbians in Hanyang, which is kind of the centre of China. And he said, look, I'm appointing you, with permission of your superior, of course, and with the direction of the Legion of Mary, to become an envoy around China. And the story is fascinating. I put it together at the time I was working on Frank Duff's cause, of his diary, his letters to Frank Duff, and Frank Duff's letters to him, and he had written up an account of his time in prison, in fact, as well. So it's quite a fascinating story. But he came home to Ireland in 1947. He had gone to China in 1931, he was appointed there. He had tried what he called Catholic action, and Catholic action was really, at the time, anything that would involve animating lay people to get involved in the life of the church. The kind of stuff they're all talking about in the synod today, it was going on back 100 years ago as well. And he had tried his own little group and his own little mission or whatever, and he said it failed utterly, that those involved were a little bit indiscreet, maybe a little bit forceful or a bit nosy or a bit troublesome, and he said just bombed, really. And then sometime later, Bishop Galvin, who was the bishop, he was the superior of the Columbians in China at the time, he had encountered Frank Duff and encountered the Legion of Mary at home, and he gave Father Aidan McGrath a handbook, it would have been sometime in the 1930s, and said, here, start the Legion. And Father Aidan tells the story himself, and he says, in those days we used to obey the bishop, so he's kind of nod, wink, wink. And so he took the handbook, but he said to himself, this failed utterly the last time. We're going to do it at night time. We're going to do it discreetly, and we'll kind of see how it gets on. So he set up things on the model of the Legion of Mary, the statue, the altar, the prayers, and so on. And they met, and he assigned, and he had kind of butchers and tailors and soldiers and sailors and whatever, it's all common people coming in. And like you're familiar with it, Roisin, you're kind of setting the tasks to the members. He set them on, and he gave them some pretty difficult tasks to do, because he felt in himself, they're not going, this is just going to fail like everything else. And when it fails, that's it. Thanks, Bishop Galvin. Here's your book back. We tried it, it failed. And he tells us against himself, So anyways, they came back the next week, and he said one after the other, they had brought people, back to visit him to get their marriages rectified. They had made contact with some difficult cases and made some progress, and he was like, wow, this is working. God was working. And so he had to eat all his words and turn all the thing back on it. And he goes on with this story because it's fascinating. It must have been sometime around the mid-1930s, because the little compound or village that he was in, he had set up a Legion Presidium to evangelize everybody there. And when the Japanese moved in, they were terrified. I'm not sure where Nanking is. I'm not sure that it was that far away, but they'd heard of, it's a kind of historical infamy the rape of Nanking, it was called. The Japanese soldiers came in and absolutely wreaked havoc in this city, and were on their way to his part of the country, and he had all his Catholics rounded up in a kind of a compound and everything else. And he tells they were praying the house down, of course, that they wouldn't be destroyed the way they were in Nanking. And he tells the story of, that obviously he was praying away, and whatever Japanese authority came in to visit him as part of their takeover, because they were just moving in, Japanese soldiers. He came in to visit him, and whatever way in his little room or wherever he was staying, he saw a picture of Loretta Young. It was on a magazine. I know she's a famous actress. I don't know if you remember the name. Or
I've heard her name, all right.
Way back in the day, I suppose back in the 1930s, obviously. And for some reason, this guy who was some authority with the Japanese kind of lit up, and he says, you're familiar with Loretta Young, because the movies were a big deal, of course, back that day too. And Father McGrath was able to say, well, yeah, actually, she's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
So in his fundraising efforts and his travels out to China, he'd passed through wherever the Cullmans were in the States, and apparently he'd met and got friendly with Loretta Young or whatever. Anyway, this was a big deal for this particular Japanese soldier, and they hit it off, and so the Japanese soldier took out some kind of I don't know what he had, some sort of text he had with a couple of symbols on it, and he had a seal in his pocket, a kind of a stamp that he stamped on it, which is the official stamp of the Japanese soldiers, that no one could enter in and defile this compound. So he said, put this up on the door so that no one can come in here.
Oh, right.
And he said it was just pure miraculous over this kind of frivolous kind of connection. And nobody went in, nobody touched, nobody got molested, or there's no damage or anything went on. In the meantime, because the story is quite interesting, I'll keep going. I started. In the meantime, of course, it was maybe it was around 1937 or 8 at this time. So maybe it must have been after this, so 1939, because the war had started. At any rate, the Japanese expelled the Irish missionaries because they didn't accept that Ireland was neutral in the Second World War, and they didn't trust Eamon de Valera or whatever information that they had. So they figured they might have that the missionaries from Ireland would have been an adverse influence. They're on the wrong side of the thing. Anyway, so they were all thrown out, and they were sent back to their head office in Hanyang. And what Father McGrath said is that what's going to happen to my lovely people? They're going to lose the faith, and who knows what will. But he said when the Japanese were finally overcome, this some years later, and he found his way back into probably the 40s, into the compound, he found that his legionaries who had set up there had continued the work they were doing, and had baptized the new babies, had
my goodness,
set up little services of prayer and so on, and kept instructing people in the faith. And when he came back, he said they were fine without me. Here was me thinking I was sure than a great fella, and they did fabulous work.
Oh my God, it's fantastic.
But that was I suppose the mid 1940s. So 1947 he'd done 15 years or more out there at that stage, and that's when he went home for a little rest. He went home for about 6 months of a rest, and that's when Archbishop Riveri said to him, "Look, Legion of Mary is to be your thing." So he went and he met Frank Duff. Right. He got very involved here in Dublin. He was from Dublin himself, and got very involved in the Legion and learned it all and saw all the great work they were doing. And then when he got back to China, Mao Zedong was taking, and the tyranny of communism was marching down from the north southwards and just sweeping across the country, and communism taking over, just as it had in Eastern Europe after the Second World War. So here was Aidan McGrath, he said, hopping in planes and flying around from one side of the country to the other and starting the Legion of Mary anywhere they could get it started, all over the country. And at one point he said the communists were marching south, and he was flying over them north back to Peking and getting things set up there, and then flying back over them, and they knew eventually.
He's a brave man.
They knew eventually they would close in on them. So he ended up in Shanghai, and he was arrested in Shanghai. And the book we put together tells the story of his imprisonment and the torture again that he endured, and the tremendous faith that he had in solitary confinement for 2.5 years. And he came back and he gave a talk at the boxing stadium here. It's a place just up South Circular Road here. Yeah, I pass it there from time to time. Like, Sir Fr Eamonn McGrath in 1954 when he had been released. He was arrested, I think, 1952. And there's lovely pictures of Frank Duff welcoming him back from China. And he was emaciated, the poor man. Sure, he was terribly treated in the prison. And they put on a big open air welcome back for him, and he gave a talk. And the Taoiseach at the time was there. De Valera, I think, was the leader of the opposition. The papal nuncio. An awful lot of dignitaries were there. And we have it actually a recording of it.
Wonderful.
And I must dig out some of those audio files.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic.
Have them all. But he told some of the stories of his time in prison, and he's fantastic. But he concluded his talk with this. He said, "May this, my second life, be as fruitful to the glory and honour of God and our Heavenly Queen." Kind of something along those lines. He was about 45 at the time, and he lived on to 96 or something.
Wonderful.
So he did have a second life.
So he carried out a load of work. My goodness.
Work. Amazing work. He died on Christmas Day in the year 2000. But one little story again. I'll start it so I'll finish. You may have heard me say it before, but when he was in prison in solitary confinement, he said, they were going mad all around him because of awful conditions. They weren't allowed to sneeze or to cough. He said the cell he was a small sized man, but the cell he could just about lie down in, and there wasn't hardly any room. It was just horrible conditions. But and they give him a small portion of rice and some water every day to live on. I mean, you just couldn't live on it. But he found early on this little bird would come and perch himself on the little tiny window up high of his cell, and so he used to keep a little grain or two of rice for the little bird. And he said that was Our Lady's way of sending him his little television, his little bit of entertainment during the day, to give him a sense of
that he could watch the bird.
Could. And the amazing thing, he said, was that many times they came into the cell, they roughed him up and put a bag over his head, and they dragged him off to some other corner of the prison, famous horrible prison. And every time he arrived in his new cell, the bird was up at the window.
Amazing. That's fantastic.
And at his funeral, somebody sent me a picture of it up in Navan, where the Columbans are. They're up the Navan Road there, that direction. He's buried in the cemetery there. We should go up and do a pilgrimage there sometime.
Lovely.
But his coffin was placed alongside. It was Christmas Day, of course, or just after Christmas. Alongside, and there was snow on the ground, and a little robin landed on top of the coffin before they laid it to the ground.
And you know that Jesus was there with them. That was wonderful.
An extraordinary little sign.
Yes.
So an amazing man, and so in terms of the Chinese martyrs there of old, who knows how many more Chinese martyrs there are for the faith. Amazing.
Keep them all in our prayers, Father, that the faith will travel.
Absolutely.
That they'll get some peace.
Amen to that. The good news, however, that we can relate, and I would bet any money, if he was alive, he would be thrilled, Father Aidan, that Radio Maria is broadcasting in Mandarin to the Chinese people from Italy, but in the hope that at least the Chinese diaspora, because sure every town in Ireland has a Chinese takeaway, that there might be some Chinese who might discover it and listen in. And who knows what way through the internet it might be accessible in mainland China too. Maybe.
Oh yes, the word spread.
So the hope is to preach the gospel in the same way that we're doing here through Radio Maria.
Absolutely.
To this vast nation of 2 billion people,
Yes, God bless them.
So please God, most extraordinary. And sure, didn't we meet a young Chinese student here, Quiveen? He's adopted an Irish name because I know what his Chinese name is. But he's interested in trying his vocation, going back to Hong Kong, So it's interesting that out of the blood of the martyrs,
yes, absolutely,
seeds of faith coming again. It's so the church is there and it's alive and well, but it has to work very carefully and very gently. And poor Pope Francis comes in for a lot of criticism for the dialogue that's going on with the Chinese government, as if it's somehow compromising
No,
the faith.
sure, he's trying to invite everybody in. Jesus spoke to everybody.
Yeah, this is his big thing, dialogue. That at least it may take time. There may be a certain amount of compromise, and hopefully not compromise of the faith or the teaching, but diplomacy in order to build a trust. A difficult thing to do. There would be, again, those in the patriotic church who would see it as a bit of a sellout. And you can understand how they'd see that too.
Yes.
Difficult.
But if they didn't know anything else, that was only everything that they've heard, So,
what do you do? I mean, do you compromise on the faith a bit, or? I'm just glad I'm not involved in those negotiations. That would be
difficult. Oh, please God, Father, that they know that Jesus loves them and that he built the church, the one church for everybody.
Amen. Amen. And that there's a vast nation there to be evangelized for Christ and whatever we might be able to do. And if Radio Maria can have a little reach in there, wow, amazing.
You're wonderful.
Absolutely
You're
amazing.
Wonderful. Our Lady is looking after them.
Absolutely. So now, Roisin, we'll take a little pause if we have anyone who wants to get in touch.
You can telephone. There's lovely ladies downstairs, and Thomas is down there too. So it's 014-123456 if you want to call us on the telephone. And then again, if you're outside of Ireland or the north of Ireland, it's +353 1412 3456. And text or WhatsApp at 089 467 2000. And outside of Ireland or the north of Ireland, it's +353 89 467 2000. Or you can email at info@radiomaria.ie.
Fantastic. We'd love to hear from you, and that's right now, or if you're listening back as a podcast or a repeat later, the very same, please do get in touch. And if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, drop a comment, and you can like and click on the share button, and again, spread the word a little bit, spread the word. So, fantastic.
Absolutely.
No, very good. And Coit is looking after us on the mixing desk. We have a nice little bit of music. We haven't heard from them for a little while. I Am its group, that lovely group that came here some time ago from Derry, and a beautiful track called Seek, which is their little beautiful rendition of Seek and You Shall Find. So we'll listen to I Am, and back with you again shortly.
First and above all things, I will seek you, and your kingdom within me, and all of your gifts, heaven and earth, be mine for the taking. But first, I will seek you. If I ask, it shall be given. If I seek, I will find you. If I knock, the door will open for me. Souls wandering endlessly, lost in the dark, searching high and low Jesus, all I need is you. I am empty now, please fill up my cup. If I ask, it shall be given. If I seek, I will find you.
Oh, isn't that lovely? It's hard to have to cut that short. It's about 5 minutes long, that song, so it does go on for a little bit. But a wonderful group. I wonder if they've produced anything else since. They surely have another CD or two out by now. That was back in 2018. Patricia Keane met them at the World Meeting of Families and invited them into the studio that time.
Yes.
And we got them on video way back. If you want to scroll way back to the page of Facebook there on our page, you'll probably see them there. Lovely group of young women and one man. They're kind of cousins and sisters. I think there's relations between them, but serious talent. Now, welcome back. Thanks for that. A shout out to next Saturday, of course, is the celebration of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Especially, we will have a rosary from Mount Carmel for you. That's in Israel, of course. Mount Carmel, that'll be broadcast to the world family of Radio Maria, and we'll be doing the English voiceover, I think, on that again next Saturday. So please do join us for that. And Youth 2000 will be coming in to take over the studio for the day. And they're going to kind of merge in around our usual schedule with prayer and Chatechesis.
That's fantastic.
So they're going to come on in and elbow us all out. And we'll work around and with them. But it'll be lovely to feature their young voices, and they'll be hosting shows, I think, from after Mass right through until 5 o'clock. I think that's the plan.
Wonderful.
So I'm not sure there's a definitive shape on it, Roisin, but we might be out of a job.
That'd be all right,
next
Father.
Saturday.
Young people are very welcome.
That's right. So we'll let them at it. We've been anxious for a long time to give you 2000 plenty of airtime here on Radio Maria. So we hope it's the beginning of something special too. Got a notice here next Saturday, if you're anywhere in and around St. Coleman's Church in Macroom, there's a day of prayer led by Father Donald McElwraith from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And if anybody wants to pop along for the Marian movement of priests, that's Macroom Church there, my former parish there. Glad to give that little shout out. And Anne Maher as well was in touch. She said there's a novena in honour of St. Camillus. And that's going on, I think, as we speak. Is it? The Feast of St. Camillus is the 14th of July, which is coming up this week. And there's novena prayers every morning at St. Camillus's Nursing Centre in Killucan, County Westmeath. And that's happening each morning at 10:30 Mass. And there's a Triduum from the 12th to the 14th. That's coming up this week. So thanks, Anne, for sending that in to us. Mass each evening for the Triduum, 12, 13, 14 at 8 p.m. and at the Feast of St. Camillus then 10:30 a.m. and 8 p.m. with a torchlight procession after the evening Mass. That's in Killucan in Westmeath in honour of St. Camillus at St. Camillus Nursing Centre there. So, little a couple of ads for you there as well. Now, there's a couple of text messages came in as well. Roisin, hi Father Eamonn. Pauline says, what is the significance of the curtains on the tabernacle?
Significance of well, yes. Well, I suppose people won't be looking at going in and taking them or whatever. But I just have always seen doors on the tabernacle.
Yeah. Have you ever seen curtains though inside the doors?
Oh, I suppose there is, Father.
You see it sometimes, not always. Sometimes.
Yes.
We don't have any curtains on ours.
No.
Maybe we should have another room. It's a little bit tighter. It's a quite shallow tabernacle. So.
And maybe in those times, Father, whenever the curtains were there, they hadn't got the doors. There could have been that, would you think?
Oh, no, I'd say hardly, in that the security would have been compromised then. You'd want to have locked doors. I'd say the curtains are reminiscent of the veil of the temple. Remember that in Scripture? The veil of the temple was torn in two at that time.
Yes.
And it's a feature of the tabernacle in the Old Testament that Moses was instructed to erect to preserve the scrolls of the commandments and the manna, the bread from heaven.
Bread from heaven.
And so there was the veil of the temple, and only those who were authorized could go inside the veil. Kind of like the sanctuary. It's the Holy of Holies that you go in behind the veil. So a very sacred place. So the veil very reminiscent of that. A bit like, traditionally of old, you don't see it as much nowadays, the veil that a bride would wear on her wedding day. And the only one really who has permission to lift the veil would be her husband after they're married. But that idea of, again, the holiness and the sacredness of his bride, and treating her with that sacredness and dignity, and not, again, needing her permission and her consent. And then it's he alone who, again, with her consent, naturally. So it's a nice lovely image as well. Yeah. Moses wore a veil over his face again to conceal the God. His face was shining with when he'd encountered God. So they told him, "Look, we can't look at you. It's like this big light in front of us here, and it has a kind of a veil on it too." But he veiled his face so that they would be dazzled and they could chat, they could speak with him. So concealing, as it were, the things of God and things that are holy as sacred. So the veil is.
That's wonderful. I didn't really realise that, Father, so thank you for telling us.
So, yeah, it's an image and a symbol, if you like, and maybe something we could consider for our own tabernacle. Yes. You were very creative in that department, Roisin. It was you lined the inside of the tabernacle for us, so it's looking lovely as it is. Eileen was in touch. We'll see how we do with a couple of minutes that are left to us here. Can you explain, she asks, about God's grace? What does it mean exactly? Is it in the Bible? Is it the same as God's will? Or is it different? And she says, I think His grace might be like God sprinkling His special kind of magic over a difficult situation as the problem just dissolves or disappears in front of our eyes. So looking for a more accurate vision of grace. So like she often hears on Radio Maria that everything we do is by God's grace. Is there a particular prayer to remind us of this when we struggle in life, and to remind us to ask for God's grace at these times?
That's a great question.
Any answer there, Roisin?
Well, just with me, my own thing, Father, would be I'd put your whole faith into God and rely on Him and prayer, and then His ways of thinking are much better than my ways of thinking. He directs you then, you know.
And what grace might actually consist of, or how we might understand it?
Well, it gives you courage. It gives you definitely courage to, like, I mean, things are going to happen. People die, people get sick, people happen, things, you know, gives you the strength to deal with, and gives you the courage to live on, you know. So God's grace is wonderful. Peace of mind.
Yes, good, all good. All good. My father used to tell a little story about the bishop who came to visit the country school years and years ago, and the bishop came in and he was examining the boys for their confirmation. And he says to the boys, which of you now can tell me what grace is? And the boy put up his hand. He says, yes, Bishop, yes, my lord. Grace is the stuff they put on the axles of the butts. As in grease, yeah. Grace. So, kind of, you know, it lubricates, I suppose, or whatever. There's an element of truth in that.
There is a bit of truth in that, all right.
Maybe a better image for grace would be like rain falling from the heavens, watering the earth, or the rays of light of the sun, heating and warming the earth and bringing growth, and all pervasive. So it's God's divine life, really, is what grace is, that we call down upon. And the more we're in communion with God's divine life, the more that grace can flow into us and through us to others. It's the help we need from God, yes. It's the strength we need from God. It's, again, cooperating, as Eileen was saying there, with God's will, and God's intention, and God's, really, His life, His divine life, living and growing in us. That's a very short answer because our time has run out. It is. So we'll have to come back to that. It's a great topic. We did a whole section in seminary on grace. The whole sort of the course, a semester or whatever on grace. So stop the lights. And I again, like all these courses, I know is any the wiser at the end of it. But these genius professors with their deep theological insights. We'll come back to it, don't worry, but thank you very much for getting in touch and stimulating our chat today. And thank you, Roisin. Very good.
Thank you very much, Father. It's wonderful to be here.
Well done. Well done. It's 12 o'clock now. We've run a bit over time. I'll lose my good job for going past the hour. And thanks to Coit and the mixing desk. We'll take our leave of you now and we'll pause and allow our bells to grant an interlude and back with our Angela.